Hello storytellers, my name is Tasya and I'm going to talk about the different elements that form a short story, and I will dissect them in my effort to help you to design and plan your short story. Welcome to the anatomy of a short story. Everyone and everything around us has a story. That's fact. Movies, they're visual stories. Songs, they're oral stories put into melodies. Even this little gachapon has a story. Maybe he's all lonely because he left all of his gachapon friends behind in the gachapon machine. Or maybe he's confused as to why I bothered buying him at Alifah if I wasn't ever going to use him. There are stories all around you. So what are they exactly? Basically, stories are a series of events happening one after the other. But not all stories are worthy to be told. For example, today I woke up at 5 a.m. feeling quite refreshed after a good sleep. I prayed as usual, and not long after I had breakfast with my family. We had my favorite, chocolate bread. See, despite all the actions that I did in that story, nothing really happened. So what are stories that are worth telling like? Well, compare that story to this alternate version. Today I woke up at 5 a.m. because the war siren was blaring all over town. Mom probably didn't mean to, but her grip on my wrist hurt as she dragged my siblings and I to our basement. Dad closed the door right when the bombs began to drop. Dust crumbled from the ceiling, the ground shook, our entire world shook, yet I sat still as a statue, mumbling prayer after prayer. Wordlessly, Dad handed me a piece of chocolate bread, the one I eat every day before school, but I barely got through my first bite, my stomach churning, bile in my throat. I wonder if we could have breakfast at all tomorrow. Another bomb dropped. Boom! The basement lamp swayed from the impact, hypnotizing, and so I laid my head against the wall, closed my eyes, and begged my body to go back to sleep. If I were to die, I wouldn't want to feel a thing. Stark difference, right? So you see, stories that are worth to be told have to be interesting. In the first version, nothing challenges our character. They're just having their morning routine. But in the second version, they're having their morning routine in the middle of an airstrike, and suddenly their lives are threatened. The easiest way to figure out if a story or a series of events is interesting is to see whether or not the first few events pop a question in your head. In the first version, were you curious about anything? The character's name perhaps? Or how they look like? What else? Do you care about what their bedroom looks like or the dining room? Not really, right? But what about the second one? Immediately in the first sentence you find the words war siren, and a lot of you must have thought, oh, what's going on? Where are they? Why is there a war? Then suddenly bombs began dropping, and generally the next train of thought would be, will the character survive this? The easiest way to make something interesting is to take something ordinary and make everything go wrong. Like maybe one day your character wakes up, a normal thing, right? But they wake up in someone else's body. Not much a fan of fantasy? Okay. Maybe your character writes love letters that she's never going to send, but one day the letters disappear and it turns out that her sister sent those letters to her crush. Simple, right? Of course, since we're talking about short story, we have to talk about length. Being a form of creative work means that there's no absolute right or absolute wrong in writing. Writers are artists, and an artist's job is literally to break the rules to make something beautiful. But there are guidelines that are accepted and used by the majority. According to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, a short story is under 7,500 words. According to Masterclass, a short story is between 1,000 to 10,000 words. Do your best to actually reach 1,000 words, because anything under 500 words falls into another category called flash fiction, a short story. If you're writing for yourself or for independent publishing, then you can write how many words you want. Go off, bro. But if you're looking to be published or to submit a story for a competition, then make sure that you check the guideline of this competition or this publisher on how long they want short stories to be. Now that we've talked about story length and finding ideas and making them interesting, you have to answer a very important question. What makes a short story? Obviously, a series of events, but this series of events have to have structure, and that structure is called plot. Then there are subjects who make these events happen or have these events happen to them. They are characters. If only good things happen to these characters, then things will be boring, so they have to face problems and they have to struggle. That's conflict. Of course, these events are happening someplace sometime, right? That's called setting. There's also the problem of who's telling the story or who's narrating the story. That's point of view. And lastly, what is your story really about? theme is the core, essential, main part of your story. Every other element in your story, such as characters, setting, conflict, they all have to reflect your story's theme. Theme is like narrowing down an entire story to just one word or one phrase. It's the heart of your story. In Indonesia, the most popular themes are love and fear. You can see this from the abundance of romance movies and horror movies. And it's natural for those two to be popular. Humans yearn love and affection, be it from family, friends, or a lover. Love is universal. Fear is also universal, because we are all animals. We hunt things for food, yes, but there are also predators that are hunting us, like lions, tigers, crocodiles, nature itself, or the predator of all predators, death. And fear is our natural response in the face of danger. It drives our survival instinct. Because love and fear are universal and instinctual in humans, it's easy for us to get attracted to stories that talk about them. Now, a novel can have multiple themes, but since short stories are, well, short, they don't have much room to explore multiple themes. Juggling 5 different themes in a short story can make it seem directionless, like teenagers who don't know who they are. If a story doesn't know who or what it is, then how are the readers supposed to get to know it and love it? Focusing on one theme makes a short story more whole, more impactful, and gives it a clear identity. Not that you can't explore multiple themes, but usually in a short story, there's one big theme that can represent all the other themes that you explore. For example, the little piece from earlier. There are themes of war and survival present, but eventually they can be rounded up to one bigger theme, fear. Another popular theme is perseverance or struggle. The classic underdog or zero to hero story where the characters fight to become a better person or to be in a better condition. It's also natural for humans to want to succeed, so they gravitate towards stories about success, because it makes them feel like they can be successful too, because it gives them a glimpse of what success feels like. And struggling for success is universally admired, unless of course the success in question has villainous intent. But even so, we will still generally admire villains' effort. Not their motive or their intent, but their effort. Like Prince Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender. He works really hard to capture the Avatar. It will be bad if he succeeds, but we respect him for not giving up. Other popular, relatable themes are friendship, adventure, and coming of age, a story where the character grows up and leaves their childhood behind and enter adulthood. People understand and to some degree yearn friendship. Eventually, everyone goes through the process of growing up. And people yearn for adventure in the midst of their boring routine. Where else could regular people like you and I go to find adventure? Fiction. In the writing process, sometimes you decide on a theme and then you develop the story from there. Or sometimes you begin with a vague idea and then you develop the story before you actually figure out what your story is really about, what the theme is. Both are completely fine, normal. You can go whichever way you want. Just make sure that the other elements in your short story reflect the theme or are related to the theme. Because a theme wraps everything up nicely like a present, whole, cohesive, and interrelated. Whatever theme you decide to use, make sure you like it. You have to be passionate about it. Because when you like it, writing it becomes enjoyable. When you enjoy writing something, then it'll be enjoyable for everyone else to read too. It really is different reading something that is made out of love versus something that is just forced to be made. So start with anything that piques your interest. You like romance? Write about love. You like traveling, magic, dragons, and the like? Write an adventure. Because love and passion are the best guides in your creative endeavors. I find it hard to imagine stories without characters. They're the ones that move the story along. They're the reason there's a plot. Even when the characters are actively doing something, they have to react to what happens to them for a plot to exist. Generally, characters are classified into protagonists, antagonists, and supporting characters. As the name suggests, supporting characters support the other characters, the protagonist and the antagonist. Now, usually people say that protagonist is the good guy and antagonist is the bad guy. But that's several notches above oversimplifying. A protagonist is your main character. The story revolves around them. They have a goal they want to reach, and the story is their journey to reach that goal. We see the majority of the story through their point of view. The readers spend time with them the most, and ideally, the readers will root for them the most. Of course, in reaching their goals, there will be obstacles, and that's where our antagonist comes in. An antagonist prevents the protagonist from reaching their goal. They have a goal that clashes or opposes our protagonists. But the important thing you need to know is that being a protagonist or an antagonist doesn't necessarily define your character's moral alignment, as in whether they're a good person or a bad person. For example, we have two characters, a brother and a sister. The brother wants to borrow their great-uncle's car to go to a camping trip with his friends. The sister wants to borrow her great-uncle's car to go to a concert with her friends. They have fairly similar goals, but their goals clash because it just happens that the camping trip and the concert will take place at the same time. As a result, they start this silly competition on who can win over their great uncle. If you put your sister as the main character and we see the majority of the story from her point of view, then that means she's the protagonist and her brother is the antagonist. But her brother isn't an evil person for wanting to go on a camping trip, is he? It works the same way vice versa. So can a villain or a bad person or a not so good person be a protagonist? Sure. Joker is a villain, but he's the protagonist of his own movie. Same with Megamind and Groot. Hanako, the protagonist of Toilet-Bound Hanako-kun, murdered someone in the past, and he often threatens people with his knife, which isn't what good people would usually do, you know? That one is fake, don't worry. All you have to do is make sure they're relatable and sympathetic. How, you ask? Characters are not just limited to humans. You can make animals, plants, or even objects as characters. Actually, if you think about it, human characters that we made up in our imagination aren't humans either. They're not real, they're just an abstract concept. To bring them to life, we have to humanize them. Humanizing is the process of making something not human more human. How? By giving the characters these three things. Let your characters feel things. Immersion is the gateway to sympathy and empathy. If a pet that your character has taken care of for years suddenly dies and their reaction to it was meh, your readers won't feel sympathy. Without sympathy, your readers will have a hard time creating an emotional connection with your characters. And with no connection, why should the readers bother reading this character's story? It's the same thing with inanimate objects. Give them emotions. Deku the Gachapon feels lonely because he's the only Gachapon on the shelf and he's all alone. We all recognize that sadness, that loneliness. We know they don't feel good, that's sympathy. So we want him to not be lonely. And thus an emotional connection is built between the readers and the character, even if he is only a Gachapon. If one day Tasha buys another Gachapon and these two Gachapons meet and become friends, then the readers will be happy for Deku. I know there are character tropes about a cold-hearted person who doesn't show any emotion. But usually they do feel emotion, it's just that they don't show it, and usually their story is about them learning to allow themselves to show emotions. If your protagonist, the character that your readers will spend most of their time with, isn't emotionally engaging, then there's a high chance that the readers will stop reading. Personality is the characteristics, nature, traits, and qualities that form a distinct person, such as intelligence, humor, kindness, laziness. But giving your characters personalities isn't just enough. We humans are not perfect, so in an attempt to humanize our characters, we have to make them imperfect by balancing between giving them positive traits and negative traits. This will make your characters more realistic and believable. Example: Sherlock Holmes from BBC Sherlock is a genius and very talented. However, he can be arrogant and he has sociopathic tendencies. The unique thing about personality is that sometimes negative and positive traits are born from each other, like how Sherlock is arrogant because he's a genius. Or they could even be one and the same thing pulled into opposing polars. Mabel Pines from Gravity Falls is an imaginative go-getter child, as in she works hard to get what she wants without caring what other people think. But because of her wild imagination, sometimes she can't think realistically and can be perceived as childish. And when pulled to the extreme, her go-getter attitude makes her selfish. The easiest way to get better at making your characters realistic is by observing the people around you, such as your family and your friends, because even there are things that we love and things that we hate about our best friend. Personality also includes interests and preferences. Your characters have a favorite color or favorite food, and you can use these to develop a story for them. For instance, your character really loves space and he wishes to go to the moon, so the story is about him working hard to become an astronaut. Speaking of wishes, let's talk about motive is the goal that drives or pushes your character into action. We've mentioned this numerous times before. Motive creates the initial general tension of the story. Will the characters reach their goal or won't they? Motive is also important because it gives your story a direction. Deku from My Hero Academia wants to become the #1 hero like his idol All Might, so his story is about him going to a hero school. Tanjiro from Demon Slayer wants to avenge his family by taking down the demon that murdered them, so the story is about him hunting down demons. Hanako wants to atone for murdering someone in the past. His story is about him becoming a protector of a school. Once you have your motive, it's easy to develop plot and conflict. Now that we have our characters, who's telling their story? Generally, short stories are written in either a first point of view or a third point of view. First point of view is us as writers putting ourselves into our characters' place as if they're the ones writing the story. It's a bit like acting out a part in a play, but it's in writing. You're inside your character's head. You know what they know, you know how they feel, you know what they think, what they see, and what they hear. The first point of view makes the story more personal because it predominantly uses the subject I. First point of view is great for stories where your narrating character discovers secrets or for something that delves deep into their thoughts and emotions. When writing in this point of view, you have to think like your character. You have to describe things with your character's vocabulary. If your character is a child or someone with low education background, then you probably can't use the word despondent to describe how they feel. You're more likely to use the word sad. Third point of view is when you narrate the story as an outsider, someone who doesn't experience the story firsthand. The advantage is that you, as a narrator, not just as a writer, knows everything about everyone every time. You can show the readers things happening somewhere that your main character doesn't know about. Like, you can reveal what the antagonist is planning without the main character knowing about it to excite readers and whatnot. You know everything, and you're free to choose which secrets you want to tell your readers and when. This point of view uses subjects like he, she, they, and it, not I or you. Though there is a unique situation where the narrator is an outsider to the story, but they are a character describing things in the story from their point of view. For example, in The Book Thief, the story is narrated by Death, who's not directly involved in the story, but is treated as if he is a character by the author. There's actually another kind of point of view called second point of view that predominantly uses the subject you. It's writing as if your main character had an amnesia and you as a writer is telling them what had happened. It also gives personal touch, just like the first point of view, because you're making it as if your reader is the main character. The use of this point of view is a bit rare actually, but you're absolutely free to experiment. Try things, see which one fits your story better. As Master Shifu said, if you don't try, you'll never know. Setting. It's the where and when of your story. They have certain meanings to or cause certain reactions in your characters. They affect how your characters act, and they can add tension to the story. So it's important to choose the right time and place to set your story in. For example, if you want to write about a woman who wants to become a doctor, with themes revolving around gender equality, gender roles, and feminism, then it will be very hard to set the story in modern times, especially in modern cities. Because today, female doctors are quite common. Unlike in America in the 1800s, where women didn't have access to formal medical training. So that setting has more potential for struggle and conflict. Naturally, it's the more interesting option. If you insist on setting the story in modern times, then you have to set it in, let's say, a very patriarchal environment. Perhaps a small, very traditional village that isn't yet familiar with progressive ideas. And then you can surround the main character with characters who oppose her dreams. Another example, the story is about a bunch of orphans living in an orphanage. They live happily, they play with each other every day, they're taken care of, their caretaker is very kind. But one day they found out that they're raised to be sacrificed as food to monsters. The situation is even more tense as they continue to live in this safe house, pretending not to know anything while planning an escape. They're going to see everything differently now. The delicious, nutritious food? Oh, they're to fatten them up and make their meat juicy. The kind caretaker who they turn to for comfort? Oh, she's the one sacrificing them to monsters. Their entire life is a lie. Drama! Place your character in a setting that would make them uncomfortable. Because when they're uncomfortable, they will struggle to fix that, and thus a story is born. Aside from time and place, another aspect of the setting is the atmosphere. It's the mood of a situation. Atmosphere is created by the time and place of your story, plus the motive and emotion of your characters. For example, it's dark outside and it's raining. Usually, this kind of setting is used to describe sadness and depressing atmosphere. But it's your characters that define what your setting means. If your character is a farmer who has been facing droughts for weeks, then they will celebrate this rain, a joyful atmosphere despite the sky being all gloomy. Yet another example of contradiction. Speaking of, conflict is the problem that your characters face in the story. It gets in the way of your characters from reaching their goal. They make the journey more complicated. Now, there are several types of conflict. Man versus nature. A family goes on a holiday, but suddenly a tsunami strikes and separates them. Man versus man. Rapunzel wants to go see the floating lights, but Mother Gothel doesn't want her to leave the tower. Man versus technology. The humans want to return home to Earth after migrating to outer space, but a robot prevents them because it thinks that they're better off in outer space. Man versus society. A boy befriends a dragon, but he lives in a village that hates and hunts down dragons. Man versus supernatural. A boy who wants to live normally is suddenly faced with the rising dead terrorizing his town. Man versus self. A guy seeks reconciliation with a girl he used to bully in elementary school, but he doesn't think a horrible person like himself deserves her forgiveness. Now, this one is really interesting. Your protagonist can be their own antagonist because of things like, for example, self-doubt, self-loathing, anxiety, fear, insecurity, etc. The conflict happens within themselves. The easiest way to make a conflict is, as I've mentioned in chapter 1, to make everything go wrong. You have a character and they have a goal they want to reach. What's the worst thing that could happen to them in their journey to reach that goal? Make it happen. Also, give them stakes. Stakes are risks or bad things that threaten to happen if the goal isn't achieved. So raise the stakes. Make sure it's crucial for the protagonist to reach their goal. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, Aang has to defeat the Fire Lord who wants to take over the world before Sozin's Comet comes. Because Sozin's Comet gives tremendous power boost to firebenders. It will allow them to literally burn the whole world. If Aang doesn't master the 4 elements and defeat the Fire Lord before Sozin's Comet comes, then there won't be a world to save anymore. That sounds intense, I know, but it's the easiest example. Of course, not all stories are about saving the world. Say we have a couple. They're having a fight because the boyfriend can't seem to manage his time between work, school, friends, family, and his girlfriend. He keeps canceling dates because of it. Now, he really doesn't mean to, but he can't seem to pull himself together. The girlfriend gives him one last chance. Come to their planned date next weekend, or they're through because it's just not working out. So the boyfriend's goal is to go to that date. What is at stake is their relationship, and the conflict is their fight plus any other scenario that might prevent him from going to that date. Now, don't forget to add feels. Show the readers that he really does love her. Make him imagine the worst thing, and show the readers how much it upsets him. Show him making effort to go to that date. Cause it ain't love without efforts, you feel? Feels feel good. Let's talk about structure. If motive gives your story direction, then plot is the road towards that direction. Plot and motive have a very close relationship. Your character has a goal. They go on a journey to reach that goal. Now, they could either succeed and then the story reaches its end, or they could fail. Both of this would end up naturally with the characters finding a new goal. Yes, your characters don't have to always succeed. But it's not always a tragedy. It is very possible that your characters realize in the middle of their journey that their wish or their goal has changed. That's normal. We humans change our minds all the time. Or perhaps they realize that they don't want to reach this goal after all, and that their true wish has been something else entirely all this time. Like the whole "what I want isn't what I need" trope. I said in chapter 2 that your characters must have motive. However, you can also write about them not knowing what they want. Make them feel uneasy, confused, or uncomfortable with not knowing what they want. But it is your job as a writer to know what they really want. So you lead the character on a journey to discover that. The basic plot is divided into 5 parts or 5 steps. First, you have exposition. This is where you introduce your character, the setting, what their motive is, and what the status quo is. Status quo is the normal condition in your story. To jump into the next part or the next step of the plot, we have something we call inciting incident. Inciting incident is something happens to your character that makes or forces them to go on a journey to reach their goal. Something that changes the status quo or their normal life. Once inciting incident happens, we go to rising action. This is the journey. All the conflicts and struggles your characters go through, they happen here. Rising action is like blowing a balloon. You keep adding conflicts, struggles, and obstacles until it finally blows up. That's the climax. In the climax, your protagonist and your antagonist face each other in a battle. It could be a literal battle or a metaphorical one. They have a confrontation. Climax is the big moment where your protagonist either wins or loses. Next, we enter falling action. It's the aftermath of the big battle's outcome. All the problems and conflicts that showed up in Rising Action starts to get solved here. Your characters react to the solutions and the outcome of the climax. The world around them changes. And finally, in denouement, these changes become the new normal for your characters. When developing a story, you can start with any of these elements. You start with the idea of a character. Like, I want to write about a character who has healing powers. Or you can start with the idea of a setting. Like, I want to write a story about zombie apocalypse. Or you can start with a theme. I want to write about female empowerment. Then you design the other elements and match them together like a jigsaw puzzle. Everyone's creative process is very unique and interesting, so what you need to do is understand yours, what you're comfortable with, what works best for you. Figure out which way is more fun and enjoyable for you. Because creative work is supposed to be fun. If it's fun for you, it's fun for everybody else. Don't pressure yourself, take your time, enjoy the process. That concludes Chapter 3 and this webinar in general. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope I shared something useful to you, and I hope we can start a discussion out of this webinar. If you have any questions, just comment down below and I will do my best to answer. Also share your thoughts, opinions, or anything really. I really enjoy writing and the creative process in general, so I'm excited for any discussion. Thank you very much for watching this webinar, and happy writing!